Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Ukrinform Information Center is back, and we will be updating you on what's going in the world. The war of Russia against Ukraine has claimed thousands of lives and also caused the humanitarian disaster. However, the Russian aggression is not aimed only on the Ukraine's independence. This aggression also targets our past, including the cultural heritage. We've known about the historical theater in Kharkiv and other cultural sites in Chernihiv and other Ukrainian cities. The scope of tragedy can only be assessed after we have prevailed, but a number of things needs to be done at this point in time. In order to discuss the series of issues, I would like to give the floor to Kateryna Chuyeva, the Deputy Minister for Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine and the Ukrainian situation. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, listeners, welcome. I thank you for the opportunity and welcome you at this press conference. And because we've got a lot of work to do, we sometimes fail to update you on the latest. And I will tell you later on why it is necessary to keep this data a little bit out of the public domain. I don't think I have the possibility to go between the slides. There are some technical glitches that I'm experiencing, but as you will know, on the 24th of March, at the 4 o'clock in the morning, Russia attacked Ukraine from a different of directions, including the Crimea and the previously occupied territories. The war has been waging on for 3 weeks now. The artillery shellings and other types of ammunitions have been used to destroy a number of Ukrainian cities. Kharkiv and Sumy and Chernihiv have been heavily damaged, and they're suffering from the onslaught. The military and technical side of this aggression is doubled with the aerial supremacy of the Russian Air Force, and they bombard and pummel those cities that are far away from the front line, including Rivne, Zhytomyr, and even Lviv. Actually, the shellings that the occupiers are engaging in, more than often, they have been talking about the high precision weaponry, but nevertheless they are aiming the schools, hospitals, and this is not a precision targeting. They are engaging and using the indiscriminate shelling and thus aiming the whole territory of this country. What do we know about the scope of the cultural sites damages so far? Well, because of some technical glitches, I'm not sure that I can show you other slides that I have prepared in my presentation. Well, there is a poor connection, another problem that I am experiencing. What do we know so far about the scope of damage and how the historical Ukrainian sites are suffering from the Russian invasion? A series of cities, Odessa, Lviv, those cities that are relatively far away from the front line, they are doing their best to protect cultural sites. In a number of cities, we have failed to do so. And again, it testifies to the fact that before the war, before this full-scale war, we were not ready for such a barbaric action. Although the Ministry of Information, we were doing our best to protect the cultural sites. But what we are witnessing now in the Western Ukraine, that people are very much engaged in defending and protecting cultural sites. On the photo, you see a composition that has become famous, the Duc de Richelieu, that has been protected by the sandbags. And such sites are seen up and down the country, as well as in Ukraine in general, and in the city of Lviv too. I'll go slide by slide. And again, I'm sorry that the Lviv community has been paying a lot of attention to make sure that the most vulnerable sites are protected. And we see that they are using all it takes to protect. One of the brightest examples is that Ukrainians do care about their cultural patrimony, and the local communities and museum and cultural communities also take an active part in protecting these sites. Unfortunately, we have only relative information on the damages inflicted upon the cultural sites. I don't think you can see my screen. And colleagues, I'm sorry for the technical issues here. Once again, I hope you can see my presentation. So we have only a relative understanding of the damages, because the hostilities are going on and a number of historic cities have been besieged, and some of them, unfortunately, have been occupied. The latter makes it very difficult to communicate with the local authorities or communities. A couple of days ago, according to the information that we received from Donetsk region, we have lost the connection with the Mariupol community, and we are not sure whether we can assess the scope of damages inflicted upon the city. But because the rockets and bombers and heavy artillery have been used, it means that the architecture is suffering from the shelling per se, or the remnants of the munitions. I will show you a couple of photographs here. Perhaps you've seen them already. The Historical Regional Museum in Oktyrka, where the building has been severely damaged. One of the museums, and the oldest ones in the territory of Ukraine, goes back to 1902. The Museum of Ukrainian History in Chernihiv. It housed a library, and as a result of the blast, another building has been destroyed or damaged as a result of the rocket attack, including the architectural site, the former cinema. One of the most egregious examples, but it has to be verified yet. But we seem to know that the museum reserve in the village of Vasilievka, and a well-known fact of how the aviation struck the Lavra in the Donetsk region, the so-called Holy Mountain Lavra. The building of the Kharkiv University, a building of the 1920s, the building of the birth of the Virgin in the Zhytomyr region. Another wooden church also suffered as a result of bombardments, and the egregious fact when there was a direct strike into the dramatic theater in the city of Mariupol, the building that housed at least a couple of hundred people. So far, we know that it looks that the basement did not suffer, meaning that the people are alive, people are being helped now, but the building itself is an architectural site. There is a series of examples, and we are keeping track of these buildings. I'll be talking about that later on. We are trying to verify all the information. Sometimes we also receive the information from the open sources. And due to the fact that we receive photos by the people on site, and that means that once the building has been hit at the railway station in Arkirka, you see it had survived World War II, but it has not survived the Russian aggression. As a result of the ceaseless bombardments of the cities, we are not aware of the scope of the damages in Mariupol, in Izum, in Okhtyrka. We have also only relative knowledge of how the historic center of Kharkiv has been hit. The House of the Word, the famous building that housed Ukrainian cultural elite in 1920s. It is an example, one of the examples of how much damage this war has brought to this country. That means that not only the interior of the buildings are suffering, but there is also a danger of these buildings collapsing and coming down. Another area in our database, something that I will be talking on later, there are religious buildings hurt. A lion's share of them belong to the Moscow Patriarchate, mainly in the eastern part of the country. And to some extent, a series of historic religious buildings, including the Ilinska church in Chernigiv, a church that goes back to the 11th or 12th century. It has been suffering as well after the bomb has exploded in the nearby vicinity. The church of the 18th century in Kharkiv and the Lavra in the Donbass area that I have already mentioned are also adding to the list of the death of the Virgin in the region of Zhytomyr and the St. George Church in the Kiev region in this village of Zagorody burned down. Horrible examples of the Russian aggression are also the Korolenko Library in Kharkiv, theaters, including the Mariupol Drama Theater, and other museums in Okhtyrka, in the village of Ivankiv, and the media have been covering that examples of how that building burned down, and the fate of the collection is unknown to us. That collection included the works by Maria Primakchenko, archaeological collection that is very precious, but we don't have any specific information on the fate of that collection. According to the witnesses and the director of the museum reported the looting of the cultural regional museum in the Zaporizhia region. We don't know what kind of items have been looted or suffered. We also don't have lots of information about the sites in the territory uncontrolled by the Ukrainian authorities, including the city of Izum. There is a lack of information on other historical sites. We know that as a result of shelling and pummeling, a number of things have happened. The historical military museum in the city of Chernihiv, and we also know that the library at the museum by Vasil Ternovsky have also been targeted by the aggressor. It looks that this is only the beginning of the list, and this is very unfortunate. We have set up a platform, one of the government-run database, to collect the data that the Russian war against Ukraine has brought. This platform is on the internet. The address of culturecrimes.mkip.government.ua. It links and references to the work of the Ministry of Culture, and we would like media to share the information about this database. It's easy to use. It has to be filled out. You feed in the data according to the questionnaire that we have developed together with the Center for Human Rights, and we've been taking on board the expertise of the General Prosecutor's Office and other government platforms. All of us are gathering now the information on the ruinous deeds of the Russian aggression, and the Ministry for Culture also gathers relative information. All these questionnaires are legally well designed because we want to have everything well documented. Unless the records are kept in a legal way, it cannot be used for further investigation. They will not be used by the International Hague Court and other international institutions in order to be the basis for the responsibilities and defining the material losses and the money that will be needed to restore these damages. As of today, we have recorded and fixed information about 60 sites. This database is growing, and we are thankful for those who are sending information. The individual information will not be shared and will not be on the public domain, and the Ministry for Information can only publish the information that can be placed in the public domain. This is how the web page looks like. There is a region, a place of the site, the definition and depiction of the reason of the ruinous act, and we are using the information that we receive from private persons, including people from Kharkiv, and we are checking our registers whether these sites have been enlisted as the sites of national, international, or local meaning. We are making our own rangering of those, and according to these levels, we feed them into the database. It will be used in the future to gauge the scope of the damages for us to analyze all the information for the law enforcement, for the Ministry of Culture, and will be sharing this information with the possible donors, because sooner or later we'll be renovating them and we will need money for that. I will leave you with the site that you can refer to, and I will go down the list of the questions that I thought I would mention. Another important issue that we would like to draw your attention to is the safety of people and of the sites when we talk about the cultural sites in the information sphere. The museum officers and the workers of other cultural institutions, including the media representatives, we ask you to avoid sharing the information on the transfer of the objects of cultural value, because the sharing of information as well as the sharing of the unverified data or the details of the destruction, that means that you put under the risk those people who take care of these collections are trying to save them, because there are looters, there are criminals. We don't exclude those situations. So the Ministry for Culture and the institutions themselves do not share the information on the means of protection and the ways that these collections or artifacts can be moving along or are being transferred. I would like to thank everybody, the public, the volunteers, those who are defending and protecting cultural heritage of Ukraine. At the ministry, we have the staff of saving the cultural heritage, people who are helping us to keep record of the destructions and all the sites that have been damaged. And we ask everybody to tell us what's going on in different museums and cultural institutions throughout Ukraine. Another initiative is called Museum Crisis Center. This initiative works with the museums, and there are volunteers and non-governmental organizations, people who have been cooperating with the museums for a long time. They have been helping materially and searching for the ways to materially help them, but they are now engaged in protecting the cultural heritage of this country. Accordingly, on my behalf and on behalf of the ministry in general, I extend my thanks to those that have volunteered, that are taking care of these problems, because without your help, we could not have done our best. Of course, our possibilities and abilities are restricted to work with those cities that are being bombarded or encircled, but we do what we can where it is possible, where we can lend a helping hand and help solve some issues regarding the cultural heritage. Another aspect that we have been talking about quite often is the dialogue with the international partners. We have received an unprecedented help from international organizations and major cultural institutions, museums from around the world, major institutions like UNESCO, the International Council of Museums, the International Council of Cultural Sites, and the Blue Shield. There are people who believe that these organizations are far away from Ukraine. They don't really know what's going on here, and there is no need to communicate with them. And this is not the case. International aid is very important, and Ukraine receives it at different levels. In particular, UNESCO and Ukraine are working on the financial aid, but not only about that. We are dealing with the decisions that have to do with the enlisting of the damaged sites, and the Blue Shield also marks those sites that fall under the obligation of the Hague Convention of 54, and two protocols. And this is important because those sites that have been marked at the level of the UNESCO and have the status of the augmented defense and protection, once these sites are damaged, this will be a witness and evidence of the military crimes against cultural heritage. Of course, every time when a decision is passed, Ukraine also has to live up to its obligation. We are trying to do our best to work in the legal framework. A number of international organizations locally and on the level of the cooperation between different institutions are coming forward with different kinds of help, such as fellowships for our scholars and help with the packaging materials or finances, everything. And all this network is working. We are communicating with our friends and colleagues, and hopefully this will promote Ukraine's position in the world and will help Ukrainians to protect our cultural heritage. As for the assessment of the damages and the mechanisms for making up for it, of course, these matters will be discussed after the war is over, because currently the list is growing, and I have already mentioned that we are not able to gauge the scope of the damages of the sites as Kharkiv or Mariupol that have been the subject of carpet bombings. So after the war is over, we will conduct a comprehensive analysis, and we will come forward with the mechanisms, with the help of the international institutions, how to make up for the losses. Of course, we are also working with the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Justice, and other government institutions. A few words about the priorities after the war. There are self-evident things. We launched a presidential program called Great Restoration. It was up and running and brought some results, very tangible results, recently. And it is evident that renovation, restoration, the preservation of different collections will be our priority. And of course, the emergency and contingencies will have to be taken into account. Hopefully, in the wake of war, we will have quite another high-quality approach to these issues. This will require interagency communication, and the conclusions that we are making now and the lessons learned experience, of course, will be high on the agenda. Now that the war has come to us, we have learned things that will be taken into account later on. Now our priority is to make sure that people are safe, and safe must be the cultural sites, movable, unmovable, material, or spiritual, because all of them are under the threat of being destroyed as the result of what Russian army is doing, because they are targeting the carriers of the tradition. We must think about all the areas of protection of our cultural heritage, and I am standing ready to answer your questions. Dear colleagues, media, and journalists, whether you have questions, I would like to ask you to ask your questions in the chat or here online. You are welcome. Madam Deputy Minister, in the chat we've got a question, I think. Thank you for your question. I have received a question from the Association of Archives and Records of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, and I'm asked what they can do to help us. Thank you for your question. We are now coordinating our efforts on the official websites of the Ministry for Culture and our associated initiatives. We are spreading and sharing the information and contacts where you can help us. As a rule, every organization that wants to help us, we individually talk to them, share contacts with them in order to plan our common actions. And I would be very grateful if you could leave your contact in chat, for example. We will make sure to contact you, or our contacts will contact you and tell what specific need we have. Perhaps I would add a few words on the following. Now, of course, we're not only talking about the cultural sites and as archaeological sites or libraries. There are archives too, and we go to great length to protect the archives. But if you stop to think of the volume of the archive that we have, it's mind-blowing, and the people there are doing what they can. Sometimes they do what they cannot do to protect such collections, archival collections. Thank you for your initiative. Oh, thank you. I can see your address now here.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Perhaps there are more questions. Dear colleagues, if there are no more questions, we will be wrapping up. And if there are questions, oh yes, we do have a question here. The question is about whether we have received some help from UNESCO. I think I mentioned that in a nutshell, but currently we are negotiating with the UNESCO organization